Herzlich, herzlich willkommen zur vierten Veranstaltung im Rahmen der Ringvorlesung Die Rückkehr des Krieges, feministische Perspektiven auf Krieg, Militarismus und Gewalt, organisiert hier vom Zentrum für interdisziplinäre Frauen- und Geschlechterforschung, kurz ZDFG, an der TU Berlin. Mein Name ist Sabine Haag, ich lehre Gender Studies an der TU seit vielen Jahren und leite das Zentrum für Geschlechterforschung. Wir untersuchen in dieser Ringvorlesung die Zusammenhänge zwischen Krieg, Militarismus, patriarchaler Gewalt und Geschlechterverhältnissen. Das ist schon lange ein Kernanliegen feministischer Theorie und Praxis. Man könnte vielleicht sogar sagen, dass sich die modernen Frauenbewegungen an der Wende vom 19. zum 20. Jahrhundert zentral, neben vielen anderen Themen, aber zentral eben auch um die Frage von Krieg und die Verhinderung von Krieg organisiert haben. Heute Abend wenden wir unseren Blick allerdings nicht direkt auf das Kriegsgeschehen und was Krieg im, jetzt mal buchstäblich gesprochen, auf dem Schlachtfeld mit den Geschlechterverhältnissen macht, sondern fragen, wie Krieg die Gesellschaften, die ihn führen und die ihn führen müssen, verändert. Welche Effekte hat Krieg für die Geschlechterordnung, für die Handlungsspielräume von Frauen und Männern in einer Gesellschaft, für die für die Art und Weise, wie Geschlechterverhältnisse in einer Gesellschaft organisiert sind? Legitimiert Krieg auch im Innern von Gesellschaften Gewalt und verstärkt binäre Denkweisen und Dichotomien in den gesellschaftlichen und mentalen tiefen Strukturen? Trägt Krieg und Militarisierung zur Verfestigung einer heteronormativen Geschlechterordnung bei oder dynamisiert sie diese womöglich? Solchen Fragen geht heute Abend die Referentin unseres heutigen Abends nach. Die Soziologin und Geschlechterforscherin Olena Strelnyk, die uns aus Kiew zugeschaltet ist, unter dem Titel War is Challenge, War is Opportunity, a Feminist Perspective on Ukrainian Society in Wartime. Ihre Ausgangsüberlegung ist so naheliegend wie grundlegend. Alle Kriege sind vergeschlechtlicht und beeinflussen Genderideologien und Beziehungen, die Organisation von Geschlechterverhältnissen und Rollen, wie gesagt, den sozialen Status von Männern und Frauen und wie wir Männlichkeit und Weiblichkeit wahrnehmen und verstehen. Dieser Einfluss stand im Mittelpunkt vieler feministischer Studien zu Krieg und Sicherheit, die bislang eher zu dem Schluss kamen, dass Kriege in der Regel Ungleichheit verschärfen, die Position von Frauen verschlechtern und militaristische Gefühle und Diskurse schüren. Diese Diskurse, so wird uns Olena heute Abend nahebringen, bedürfen jedoch einer Überarbeitung und einer differenzierten Perspektive im Kontext des umfassenden Krieges Russlands gegen die Ukraine. Auf der Grundlage von Interviews mit aktiven VertreterInnen der feministischen Bewegung in der Ukraine zeichnet Olena Strelnyk ein facettenreiches Bild der Herausforderungen des Krieges für Frauen, für die Gleichstellung der Geschlechter und die feministische Bewegung. Olena Strelnyk habilitierte in Soziologie an der Taras Schewtschenko-Universität in Kiew. Sie ist die Autorin von Child Care's Work, A Sociological Perspective on Mothering 2017 und hat vielfach wissenschaftlich und populärwissenschaftlich zu Fragen von Geschlechterungleichheit in der Ukraine, Care-Arbeit und die Auswirkungen des Krieges auf Geschlechterrollen publiziert. Olena war Gastwissenschaftlerin am Institute for Research on Women and Gender an der University of Michigan, am Prague Civil Society Center und zuletzt an der Technischen Universität in München bis zum Herbst 2024. Olena schreibt auch für ukrainische und internationale Medien zu geschlechtsspezifischen und geschlechtsbezogenen Themen. Derzeit, derzeit arbeitet sie als Senior Researcher am Institut für Soziologie der National Academy of Science in der Ukraine in Kiew und ist Associate Researcher an Indiana University Bloomington. Seit Oktober 24 ist Olena Strelnyk Fellow im Ukraine Research Network am Zentrum für Osteuropa und internationale Studien hier in Berlin. Leider meistens nur virtuell zugeschaltet, aber ab und zu auch in Person in Berlin. Ihr Projekt trägt den Titel Seeing the Invisible: Family Care for the Elderly in a War-Torn Ukraine. Darin befasst sie sich mit der Frage, wie Familien im Krieg die alltägliche Pflege älterer Menschen organisieren und wie strukturelle Bedingungen die Praktiken der Organisation dieser Pflege beeinflussen. Auch das ist natürlich ein hochgradig vergeschlechtlichtes Thema und Fragestellung. Diese Praktiken werden, wie gesagt, als geschlechtsspezifisch betrachtet, da sie innerhalb einer patriarchalischen Geschlechterordnung stattfinden und von dieser geprägt sind, in der Frauen, und das ist in der Ukraine nicht viel anders als in unserem Land, in der Regel noch immer die Aufgabe zugewiesen wird, sich um Kinder und Ältere zu kümmern. Irina hat vielfach publiziert. Ich will hier nur einige Beiträge nennen, die in deutschen Publikationen sozusagen leicht zugänglich sind, die Sie auch sehr leicht online finden können. Sie hat zuletzt beigetragen zu einem Forum, das wir im Rahmen der feministischen Studien zum Ukraine-Krieg gemacht haben. Das ist das Heft Mai 2024 im letzten Jahr. Die feministischen Studien sind Open Access auf der Verlagsseite der Grötter Verlag zugänglich. Dort finden Sie also auch den Beitrag von Olena. Und dann gibt es eine Reihe von Beiträgen auf dem Online-Publikationsmagazin, Beiträge zur Geschichte der Gegenwart. Auch hier gibt es eine Reihe von, auch bezogen auf die Ukraine und den Krieg gegen die Ukraine, Beiträge von Olena. Zum Schluss, bevor ich dann das Mikrofon virtuell an Olena weiterreiche, der Plattform X habe ich ein Zitat, ein Post gefunden von UN Women Ukraine. Die haben eine Rubrik, die nennen sie Quote of the Week. Und da ist tatsächlich in dieser Woche ein Zitat von Olena, das Zitat der Woche. Und das lautet wie folgt: Feminism does not contradict the values of family and motherhood, but instead promotes the recognition of the social value of women's reproductive labor and care for children as its component. Und ich bin mir sicher, auch darüber werden wir vielleicht ein bisschen was hören. Ich habe noch ein, zwei technische Details, bevor ich dann selbst wieder vom Bildschirm verschwinde. Der Vortrag selbst wird in Englisch gehalten. Die Diskussion hinterher wollen wir so gestalten, dass Sie und ihr die Möglichkeit habt, eure Fragen über die Fragen- und Antwortfunktion, die ihr unten in der Leiste findet. Die heißt in der deutschen Zoom-Version eben F und A. Wer eine englischsprachige hat, da heißt es dann eben Q&A. Dort könnt ihr und Sie eure Fragen schriftlich hinterlassen. Ich nehme die dann auf und lese sie laut vor, sodass alle sie auch hören können. Und Olena hat dann jeweils die Möglichkeit zu antworten. Sie können Ihre Fragen auf Deutsch oder Englisch stellen und gegebenenfalls sozusagen helfe ich dann mit der Übersetzung aus. Technische Fragen jedweder Art können auch dort gepostet werden und werden dann von unserer studentischen Mitarbeiterin Larissa Buschert, die heute Abend gemeinsam mit Louison Jenkins sozusagen technisch das Webinar betreut. Larissa ist für die sozusagen technischen, formalen Fragen zuständig und die inhaltlichen Fragen, wie gesagt, moderiere ich dann im Anschluss an den Vortrag. Und damit übergebe ich now, Olena, very warm welcome to our lecture series. I'm very glad you are able to join us tonight, and I'm looking forward to your talk. And now turn over the mic to you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you everybody that you are able to join despite it's pretty late evening in Ukraine. It's 1 hour later than in Berlin. And for me, it's a great opportunity to make voices of Ukrainian scholars, Ukrainian women, Ukrainian feminists more vocal in the world. And let me start my presentation. My talk is going to be, I think, around 40 minutes, and then we will have enough time and space for Q&A session. So I hope it works, it operates, right? Perfect. So, dear participants, I'm gonna start from my talk with a quote from an interview with one of the Ukrainian feminists, which I would say presents in some way, the sense of my today's talk. War is obviously a tragedy, but somehow we manage to use it as an opportunity as well. An opportunity to build new rules we hadn't thought of before, to adapt and to see completely different perspectives. Before I will delve into the feminist perspective as such, let me start from the overview of the context. So my question is why I think we need a more nuanced view on the Russo-Ukrainian war. From the war and security studies, we know that all wars are gendered, as Sabina said in presentation of my today's talk. And the influence of wars on gender orders, gender roles, femininity and masculinity, etc., has been in the focus of many, mainly Anglo-Saxon and Northern European gender and feminist studies of war and security since at least 80s. And the conventional conclusion of this work and studies is that wars usually exacerbate gender inequality and dramatically disadvantage women. And this research found as well that wars, militarization, and patriarchy are closely interconnected. Gender ideologies built during the war is based on essentialist ideas, as you can see on this picture drawing from one of social networks, that men are defenders while women are those who are defended. It is also argued that wars, especially national liberation wars, fuel not only military but also nationalistic sentiments and discourses in which women are presented as biological, cultural, and social reproducers of nations, and men again as nations defenders. We know this from many classical works. Meanwhile, these conclusions require some revisions or a more nuanced view in the context of ongoing Russia's war against Ukraine. Despite some predictions of future wars are mostly hybrid, virtual, new wars, postmodern wars, rather than being fought by national armies, Ukraine faced with the challenge of a full-scale classical war, so to say, that required a significant mobilization of human resources for resistance, having no powerful professional army. As a result, as probably you know, general mobilization was launched and the rights of men of draft age were restricted. For example, the vast majority of them, they are prohibited to travel abroad. In fact, we can talk, of course, about the formation of the new regime of gendered citizenship that affects not only men, but of course, women as well. The war created a range of gender-related problems for women, the growth of gender-based violence, conflict-related sexual violence. increasing burden of reproductive or care work on some groups of women, for example, mothers of preschool and primary school children, or wives and mothers of wounded soldiers. On this slide, you see on the left part of the slide a mother who helps her kid with homework tasks, or on the right part, it's a mother who celebrates with her son's birthday in metro station during air raid alarm. Of course, we face with the deepening of feminization of poverty, increasing a share of vulnerable groups of women, for example, widows and single mothers. As you know, of course, that one more illustration of this additional care burden when women compensate for the deficiency of the public system of treatment and rehabilitation of military. Of course, you know that women, they are predominant share of women, women ensure they are predominantly share of among war refugees, as you can see on these slides. We are dealing, Ukrainian women dealing with increasing burden on one more slide about women refugees who are still kind of demand and do a lot of work on advocating interests of Ukraine abroad. And increasing burden on feminist fields of employment, for example, education, healthcare, social work. On this slide, these jobs, they of course are key in overcoming and humanitarian challenges of war, but still invisible very often. On this slide, you can see a teacher who conducts a lesson on the street during a blackout because she had no electricity and internet access, and just to conduct the lesson for kids online, she connected Wi-Fi near the supermarket. Of course, the war has created numerous challenges for Ukrainian feminism and feminist activists, solving humanitarian issues, supporting vulnerable groups of women, engaging in international advocacy to promote the interest of the Ukrainian feminist movement, and in the local advocacy. At the same time, although the war exacerbated typical gender issues, gender inequalities, and created new ones, the mere existence and number of such issues do not indicate a conservative backlash, conservative gender backlash, as the Ukrainian society responded to war-related problems in emancipatory mode. And the uniqueness of this Russia's war against Ukraine, it leads due to at least several factors. So why we need this more nuanced view? The first reason that Ukraine has entered into the full-scale war with permanent state gender equality policies, not linear but steady progress in closing gender gaps, and developed women's feminist movement. For example, on this picture, this slide, you can see the rather popular feminist women's march that in pre-war time were conducted in many cities of Ukraine on the day of 8th of March, and and they became more and more popular. And to give you a little bit more context regarding the situation on women's rights in Ukraine, I will give you maybe some very core data. I don't want to overburden you, but at least some of them I'm gonna show you. For example, regarding the employment and the economy, of course, we are dealing with gender gap in labor force, like everywhere basically, but the level of economic activity of Ukrainian women is rather high, including employment rate of women who have younger children. And of course, we still have the gender pay gap. The last available data, it's around 18%, and recently the state has adopted the program of on decreasing the gender pay gap. Then, if we consider the political participation of women, which one of the core measure or core index, so to say. For example, here you can see the progress regarding the percentage of women among deputies in the Ukrainian parliament. Now it's 21%. Of course, it's not so many, right? And one of the reasons, by the way, it's the law on gender political party quotas, gender quota in political parties list. It was one of the reasons of increasing the share of women. But of course, like in comparison with the first parliament convocation, the progress is visible. And maybe some data about health, the gender gap regarding life expectancy is more than 10 years, which is very high. And yeah, work-life balance, if we look in comparison with, for example, in other countries, like the level of enrollment of younger children in preschool education is pretty low, only 15%, by different reasons. Families and women, they don't use the preschool childcare institutions in early age. And yeah, we still, of course, like everywhere, we're still dealing with gap in unpaid care work. As you can see, according to the data, it's I would say it's this data regarding unpaid care work. Sorry, I did not indicate this. It's in minutes per week, I assume. Sorry that I did not specify this. Going back to the Ukrainian, like the background of Ukrainian women's or feminist movement. The state policy of gender equality especially strengthened in Ukraine after 2014, namely after the events of Revolution of Dignity and the signing of the association agreement between Ukraine and the EU. And women as feminist organizations are important agents of change in Ukraine. The last year, we celebrated the 140th anniversary of like women's movement in Ukraine. And the first organizations, the goals and forms of activity of which can be defined as feminist, began their work in the second half of 90s. Of course, they did not identify themselves mostly as feminists, or their activity was pretty much ambivalent in different ways. But anyway, the roots of first feminist organization was established after Ukraine gained independence. Currently, the range of women's feminist organizations in Ukraine is diverse in terms of both work and ideological direction, and I would say that they have significant roles in women's rights advocacy. For example, last year, the Ukrainian Women's Foundation conducted a survey of Ukrainian representatives of Ukrainian feminist organizations, and 40% believe that the movement is already at the stage of maturity, and only 19% of surveyed believe that the movement is still in the formative stage. Also, full-scale war, as I said, have led to the emergence of the new regime of gendered citizenship, where men are assigned to the function of protecting the state. The full-scale war did not stop political movement in the direction of gender equality. For example, since the full-scale invasion happened, some core gender equality policies have been adopted. For example, the most important is certification of the Istanbul Convention. For example, its strategy for gender equality in education, and the state strategy for ensuring gender equality in Ukraine. Second important nuance regarding the context, this is the unique geopolitical and cultural context of the war related to European integration processes and Ukrainian society's aspiration to distance itself from culture and ideology of the so-called Ruski Mir, Russian world. And this is an important factor, I would say, in the stability of gender transformative changes. From literature, we know how gender and sexuality are inscribed in geopolitical projects and confrontations. So-called cultural war of Russia for traditional values against the decline in past is well studied, which later became a justification for Russia's actual military invasion of Ukraine, as Graf, Korolchuk, Kratochvil, and O'Sullivan mentioned. And for example, Kratochvil and Sullivan call the war this war a war like no other, because the war is not a purely military conflict. They argue that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is not only gendered in the way that other conflicts are, but the war's essential novelty lies in that fact that it's explicitly fought for the so-called traditional values against gender and sexual equality. And these occupy a central place in the Russian campaign against the European Union. And this cultural war has played a major part in legitimizing the actual military invasion of Ukraine. A little bit later, I will go back to this thesis regarding how it creates the new political context for promoting feminist agenda in Ukraine. And the third element of this context, this is social and cultural expectations and practices regarding women and men. And of course, the attitudes and practices of distribution, so-called gender roles, are more persistent component of gender order. Ukrainian women and men largely hold pretty traditional patriarchal views on family, for example, family role distribution. However, polls show slow but steady progress towards the more egalitarian views since 2014, and this progress did not stop since the invasion. Of course, this progress should be very cautiously evaluated, as it shows that perceptions of women's public role are emancipating faster than those of their private roles. For example, as 2023 survey showed that compared to pre-war time, the share of Ukrainians who believe that men are better leaders than women decreased significantly. From sociological point of view, this is quite significant progress, right? From 43 to 24%. But at the same time, those who believe that the main purpose or destiny, so to say, for women is to give birth to children, the share of population who support this thesis decreased as well, but only 5%, which is a little bit larger, bigger than so-called sample error, right? So it means again that Ukrainian society is still pretty much more open to public roles of women than to ideas of gender equality in family roles. And one of the factors of the erosion of traditional patriarchal views in Ukraine now is visible contribution of women to the military resistance. Reforms in professional army began after 2014, and now professional army is open to women with practically no restrictions, and about 10,000 of them are on front line. And it seems that they are becoming very vocal and visible. And if you look at the data of survey in 2023, 80% of respondents associated the image of war veteran equally with women and men, while only 20% associated it exclusively with men. And also a minority of Ukrainian society supports the idea of full equal rights for LGBT plus people, including marriage. Positive dynamics were also recorded during the war. Just give you some examples. It can be assumed that these changes, positive, some slowly, but positive dynamics regarding the issue of equal rights for LGBT people, it happened as a result at least of two reasons, two factors. The first is the increase of public visibility of LGBT military personnel. In wartime, as we know from the literature, the figure of a soldier defending the country is symbolically very powerful, and the involvement in the defense of the country is a factor in legitimizing political demands for equal rights and a window of, so to say, tolerance toward the LGBT community. This discourse basically accompanied the discussion on the need to adopt the bill in Ukraine, which aims to allow citizens to enter into registered or so-called civil partnership. As you know, the marriage for LGBT people in Ukraine, they are not allowed, but we have the bill. It was initiated 2 years ago. It still was not passed regarding the civil partnership. The second factor that is likely to stimulate positive changes in public's attitudes toward the rights of LGBT people is the above-mentioned unique geopolitical nature of the war and the association of homophobia and ideas against gender equality with the values and policies of aggressor country, with Russia, from which Ukrainian society seeks to distance itself. Now, actually, I have completed the overview of the context. Let me go further and delve into the results of the project, which we have conducted in collaboration with the resource 100 Деталях, with the support of German Institute of Development and Sustainability, together with my two colleagues, Dr. Yusva Ludmila and Tamara Zlobina. And I'm going to present you briefly the core results from this project, which was, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to follow the time. The research, it was based on the usage of basically three methods of data collection. It was this survey conducted in 2024, which covered more than 700 participants from all regions of Ukraine who identify themselves as feminists. Women and men, as well as non-binary individuals, were invited. There were 20 in-depth interviews with feminist researchers and activists. The sample was formed in such a way as to include feminists of various fields of activism or professional activity and from various ideological positions. And in this way, the sample represented 6 clusters: professional, academic, activists, donor, and ideological, so to say. And we conducted as well focus groups by taking into account time considerations, and that basically interviews basically was the part of my core contribution to this project. Mostly I'm going to present data from these interviews and from kind of my observations as a feminist scholar and feminist, partly a little bit activist, because I was happy to be a co-organizer of Feminist March in my native city in 2020, in 22 and 21, and I was co-organized. It's Poltava, basically. I don't live in Kiev. So, I mean that I'm partly, a little bit street activist as well. So, and let me present briefly the result of this research. And I'm going to start from the impact of feminist perspective and actions on Ukrainian society, how our respondents, they estimate this impact. If we look at this data, we see that surveyed feminists, surveyed through this survey, basically through quantitative methods, the vast majority of them, around, I would say 67% believe that feminist ideas and perspectives have a moderate impact on Ukrainian society. As you can see on this figure, the vast majority of attitudes are concentrated around if you look at this scale from 1 to 10, that's more or less moderate, right? So 4, 5, 6, 7 scores. But it is interesting that data from interviews, and let me remind you that interviews we conduct with the most active representatives of feminist movement, the data from interviews presents somewhat more optimistic picture of this influence, taking into account that, again, the participants of interview represent the most active segment of Ukrainian feminism. Of course, I assume that we can't exclude some kind of positive biases, right, related to the overestimation of feminist impact. I would probably, I'm not very objective as well, and I would support the idea that the influence is pretty strong. So the vast majority of interviewed feminists, they said that they estimate the impact is pretty high, especially in the context of temporal perspective, evaluating this impact now and let's say, I don't know, 20 years ago. Justifying their opinions, why they see the impact is pretty high, they name several reasons, justification regarding this. First, it concerns the political dimension, especially legislative changes toward gender equality and increasing political representation of women. The participants of interviews recalled numerous legislative changes, which, in their opinion, are results of the active Ukrainian feminism and pressure on the authorities. For example, again, they mentioned all this legislation that I have mentioned in the beginning. For example, the ratification of the Istanbul Convention. A little bit later, I will explain to you how I would say we have to estimate the impact of feminist of the ratification of this convention, because basically it happened. Well, Ukrainian feminist movement advocated the ratification of the Istanbul Convention for more than 10 years, but it did not happen because the active resistance of so-called anti-gender forces in Ukraine, right? And in June 2022, when Ukraine expected on getting the status of candidacy on accession to the European Union, just probably, or I'm more than sure that it was the reason to show the loyalty of Ukrainian government to European identity, right? The convention was ratified because of the political context that changed dramatically. Secondly, about the influence, impact of feminism, the participants spoke about the significant success of Ukrainian feminism on preventing and combating GBV and issues related to conflict-related sexual violence, which is linked to both legislative changes and practices of working with survivors. Well, I understand it objectively, it's difficult to objectively, more or less, assess the effectiveness of this work, especially in the context of the increase in calls, especially since the war started, increase in calls regarding hotlines, what I mean, or to the police regarding domestic violence. But there is no doubt that the work with this topic is one of the central focuses of Ukrainians, women's and feminist organizations. Thirdly, and it's interesting, it's definitely war-related phenomenon. Feminists noted changes in gender equality issues in the security and defense sector, stimulated by feminist research, advocacy campaigns, and petitions. For example, in March last year, several women's NGOs initiated a petition to the president of Ukraine demanding the implementation of the already developed mechanisms for combating sexual harassment and violence in the armed forces of Ukraine. And this petition received the necessary 25,000 of votes, which is pretty many. And as of December, and in this case, the president is obliged to respond, right, on this petition. As of December 2024, the Ministry of Defense launched that they are working on the implementation of this mechanism against sexual harassment in the armed forces in coordination with women's NGO. But I would say that this petition is a continuation of the systematic work of women's organizations to protect the rights of military women since at least 2015. Probably, you know, when the war in Donetsk and Lugansk region started, many women who went to serve faced with the restrictions and challenges, because that time many military professions were prohibited for them, and the situation changed under the very famous project, the Invisible Battalion, when the first research on the problems of women in the army was conducted. And after the research, the list of military professions allowed for women in the army was significantly expanded. And this project provoked a public debate regarding the situation for women in the army. And gradually, a gender-responsive approach is gradually being introduced in the security sector. But what I would like to emphasize, as Hanna Kritsenko mentioned, that these changes was not granted to women by authorities from the top down. These changes were stimulated actively by women activists, right? Okay, it's more optimistic view regarding the impact of feminism. Of course, part of surveyed feminists, they said that they evaluated this impact of feminism more cautiously, viewing it as contradictory or relatively weak, and mentioned, for example, yes, of course, we have a lot of good state policies and laws, and they were advocated indeed by feminists, but their contribution by politicians is not recognized, right? Partly due to the negative connotation of feminism in society, which in turn affects women's willingness, especially public figures, to articulate their position as feminists, which is not unique for Ukraine, I assume. For example, one of the quotes from the interview, "It's more comfortable to be a feminist public activist than a feminist politician." Interestingly, if we go to a survey data, let me remind you that survey was for kind of broader public, so to say, not necessarily feminist activists. So according to quantitative research data, feminist perspectives and actions encounter the greatest obstacles in areas such as politics and the military, as you can see on this diagram. And this data, as we see, contrast with the data from in-depth interview with the most active representatives of feminist movement, who noted that the changes in political sphere and security and defense sector are the most tangible examples of feminist influence. It's likely that for the let's say, wider circle of women who identify themselves as feminists, these changes in defense sector or in politics not as visible. Instead, the quantitative data on this diagram shows that the greatest impact of feminist perspectives is noticeable in the spheres of kind of media, culture, civil society, and education. The next block of questions, it's about the influence of feminism in the context of war. How feminists, they consider opportunities and limitations for this impact in the context of ongoing defense. It's interesting because the vast majority of our 2020 feminists whom we interviewed said that the agency of Ukrainian women in their adoption of new roles is a positive factor in feminism's influence on society in the context of war. Specifically, they said about the contribution of women to military resistance, because of course it's crucial now, the defense and the army, right? And maybe to give you a little bit more context regarding this issue, because I have said a lot of things before. For example, now military women, it's more than 5% of the total number of armed forces of Ukraine. And of course, they are becoming more visible and their roles are becoming more normalized. Probably if you have seen this very Euro contest 2022 Kalosh Orchestra, it's Ukrainian musician group, and their video Stefania, it's basically about the mother who is military, which is interesting and from cultural point of view. And just let me skip maybe some slides, but just that, for example, the so-called Day of Defender, we have this holiday in Ukraine. It was officially renamed. Despite the German language, Ukrainian language is not super gender sensitive, right? And normally masculinity, they are used for female professions and occupation as well. So it means that the work with language is important. And this Day of Defenders recently was renamed on Day of Ukrainian захисники and захисниці, it means male and female genders, right? Just to give you this overview about the visibility. The second very kind of interesting phenomenon which contributes to promoting more feminist ideas in Ukraine, it's women who are taking the so-called traditionally male's profession. For example, truck drivers. And some feminists, or even many of them, they believe that it can promote more feminist ideas. Just to inform you, can you imagine that till 2017, more than 400 of professions were officially banned for women. This legislation was developed during Soviet times, and it was a huge discussion. Should we have these legislations still, or should we not? Now, even those who are very critical towards women who work in male's profession, they are a little bit silent, became more silent, just because I would say we are dealing with the great deficit of labor market because of males' mobilization. This is the first reason. The second one, that many men, they prefer to avoid any official employment, because if you would like to be officially employed, you have to go first to this military registration office with the risk to be conscripted. And this situation led to that, I would say that the dictatorship of employers is over, because now it seems that happy to have more women who cover this deficit. And the third reason for promoting, one of the possible reasons, so to say, that probably may lead to promoting more feminist ideas, how our informants was talking about this. This is the experience of relocation abroad and exposure to new, more egalitarian views and practices. I'm not gonna, give you quotes. I don't know. Okay, I will give you one. For example, one of our informants said, women who are currently working abroad, who have settled there, see the differences in how society in Ukraine is organized around the care work, childcare, compared to how it's organized in other countries. They see the differences. They see what is better, what is worse. And with these ideas, they generously share with their friends in Ukraine, etc. Well, of course, I understand that this is a certain idealization of developed world, right? But what I would like to add, that definitely Ukrainian women, for example, refugee, they gained in principle new experience. Refugeehood is not a tragedy, but also a new experience of independence, of responsibility, which can have consequences for their identity and attitude towards, probably towards feminism as well. About 1/3 of feminists whom we interviewed noted that the war in its political and cultural context have created an additional window of political opportunities for promoting gender equality ideas. Primarily, they mean the processes of European integration and demands of donors and international partners. But of course, many of them, they consider challenges posed by the war. And the most frequently mentioned was, for example, decreasing influence of women on decision-making. If we delve into these challenges about the limitations of feminism during the war, we can name at least several examples. First, this is the decreasing influence of women in decision making. And here you can see the quote from an interview that men continue to hold power because it's believed that men are much more knowledgeable about the war and everything related to it. They also mentioned restrictions on the political participation of women. For example, after the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine resolution dated by 2023, can you imagine that this resolution prohibited all local councils deputies from crossing the border regardless of their military duty, including women. The paradox is that if you are a local council deputy, it's not a paid activity at all. It's 100% voluntary activity. And basically, if you're going as a deputy abroad, you can't have the legal business trip, passport or something like that, because it's not your job officially. And it led at least to, we don't know how many cases, but at least some women local deputies resigned. I mean, that they left their mandate, so to say, because they were prohibited from leaving the country, while, for example, they have, kids, grandkids who are displaced abroad. And so it's a little bit risky, and it's now other challenge that is highly discussed in Ukraine. For example, if we have the elections, for example, this year, I don't know. As of now, it's prohibited, but we don't know. It will be the huge question how to organize the write-in votes for women displaced abroad for millions of them, how technically organize this and to help them realize their civic rights to vote. And the next, of course, this is the negative impact of the World Women's Organizations as such, particularly regarding the reorientation of feminist and LGBT plus organizations to address emergency issues at the expense of strategic development, or the outflow of some feminists abroad, or asymmetry in collaboration with donors, or when gender equality is perceived as non-urgent, non-priority topics during the wartime challenges, for example, such as LGBT plus people rights. And one of the quote from the interview, there is a certain understanding that it's not a priority. The priority is to survive and taking care for one's survival, right? Instead of, I don't know, to visit some, for example, evening lecture, right, on gender equality. And my last part regarding this project will be, of course, regarding the perspectives relevant to the context of post-war reconstruction and development. What are the views of feminist activists regarding post-war development? Let me check how many time. So basically, I have to conclude. So I will a little bit speed up, so to say. So general reflections from feminists regarding gender-sensitive reconstruction of the country concern the misconception. Okay, I have something in the chat. Let me. Don't worry about it. Okay, thank you very much. But anyway, general reflections concern the misconception, in the opinion of feminists, of reconstruction or post-war reconstruction of the country as merely restoring what has been destroyed, whereas reconstruction should involve restructuring, including social infrastructure and its inclusivity in a broad sense. The interviewed activists also expressed concerns about the declarative and unsystematic nature of implementing a feminist approach to reconstruction. Among the feminist perspectives that they will be relevant in the post-war period, the interviewed feminists first highlighted the issues of care work, or depending on your political or ideological views, reproductive work. They emphasize that women's assumption of new roles in the public spheres requires the creation or improvement, the condition of caregiving labor, and the advocacy for improving care infrastructure could be a good tool to encourage the return of women refugees to Ukraine. In discussions about improving care infrastructure, some informants noted that second, a range of problems associated with demographic challenges and anticipated or probable reproductive pressure on women was highlighted. You know, we are dealing with this discourse of demographic catastrophe. And some informants expressed their concern about possible conservative backlash regarding women's reproductive rights. However, they viewed that women's movement in Ukraine is rather powerful to counter these challenges, and spoke about Euro integration processes as a certain safeguard against possible backlash. Personally, I believe that, of course, abortions bans initiatives is not something new for Ukraine now. They haven't like all the time, but I believe indeed that they won't be implemented into the decisions including because the women's movement is rather strong in Ukraine. Thirdly, the challenges associated with the return of veterans were discussed, the complex issue of their rehabilitation, the non-inclusiveness of infrastructure, and of course, the risk of rising gender-based violence and it's pity to admit, but self-censorship in discussion of this topic of the gender-based violence in veterans' family in the context of heroization of the military. Fourthly, the interview spoke about the relevance of women's employment, particularly in the context of women taking traditionally males' profession. It's very hard to estimate, but definitely we don't know if this trend will be stable or it will be over when men will return to the labor market. But optimistic expectations that probably this includes to the creation of safe or gender-responsive workplaces, because employers, they have to adapt somehow, right, to women who entered into this male's profession. And thirdly, in the last point, this is the risk of the problems of women's political participation. This includes, for example, prioritization of the voices of military personnel and the restrictions on the political participation of women who have gone abroad. Of course, from the literature regarding all wars, we know that the voices of military during the war and after war is pretty strong, right? While women voices can be marginalized in this context. Okay, thank you very much for your attention, and I will go to conclusions to my talk, and let me present them in two parts. The first one is windows of opportunity for feminism during the war in Ukraine, and the second one will be about the limitations or hindrances, general and war specific, of course. So, windows of opportunity, according to the data of this research and my observation, so to say. Of course, the first one is European integration and international commitments made by Ukraine on gender equality. It's a good entry point, in communication with state authorities, that we are obliged at the state and the society to realize this policy. And it might be a good entry point to promote feminist politics. Then the opposition to the ideology of the Ruski Mir, Russian world, which is emphasis on the traditional values, can be entry point to further popularize, so to say, gender equality and LGBT rights as European values. Well, I definitely know all these critiques regarding the idealization of the situation with gender equality and LGBT people rights in the European Union. I know all these critiques behind this, but practically it's a good entry point as well. Then, of course, as we have developed legislation on gender equality, it's a good framework for progress, right? When I, for example, communicate with local authorities or given them workshop regarding gender mainstream, I start from that we have this legislation and you have to realize, implement it. And the war and crisis present new opportunities for women to enter to new roles. Yes, of course, there are some doubts whether it's good or bad or what is the long-run perspective regarding this. But it can be good. Good point as well. For example, contribution of women to military resistance, which is very, very visible now. And what about hindrances? Let me start from the general hindrances, which are, I assume, relevant to not only to Ukraine, to Germany as well. For example, many women and men, they perceive gender inequality as absolutely non-urgent in modern society. For many women in Ukraine, engaging in politics, civic activism, business presents a double burden, because probably you remember from the data that I have presented that Ukrainian society still expects that the vast majority of care work or, reproductive work will be or should be on women's shoulders, right? Then, of course, we are still struggling with public prejudices against feminism biases, and definitely know about these prejudices as well. And many women's organizations engaged in feminist activism do not explicitly identify themselves as feminist organizations, especially regarding, for example, political figures and leaders who avoid to identify them openly as feminists. And what about war-related hindrances? First of all, I have mentioned several times the new regime of gendered citizenship could pose a challenge for mediation of feminist communication. For example, definitely the vast majority of society in Ukraine is indifferent to feminism as such, but in condition of restrictions on men's rights, some people may ask what feminism or feminists think about the draft of men, or how do they support the equal responsibilities regarding conscription, all these provocative questions. And it might be challenging for Ukraine. And the next one is self-censorship. As I have mentioned, for example, regarding the problems of domestic violence in veterans' family, regarding the problem of sexual harassment in the army. If we are operating in the context of symbolically, high position of military, it might be challenging to criticize them, right? And of course, this one of the challenges of possible neoliberal agenda of post-war recovery, because the Ukrainian government has launched already this neoliberal agenda and the idea of free market. We know how it can be harmful to women, first of all. And my last slide for today's evening, thank you very much for your attention. If you would like to support somehow Ukrainian feminist organization, you can, for example, support the very famous one, so-called Marsh Zhinok, who this organization does very great work on supporting different groups of women during this war. Thank you very much. Vielen Dank. Sorry, I hope that you are not super tired for questions. And I'm looking forward to hear your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Olena, very much for this really informative and inspiring talk. While people are trying to get their thoughts together and come up with questions, I would start with a maybe rather simple one. You mentioned the enormous number of professions that had banned women from entering, I think it was 400 or so. I mean, would you have a few examples, and what was the rationale behind banning women from the professions?
Thank you, dear Sabina, for the question. Yes, of course, I can give you some examples. It was a part of Soviet legislation, which was, as you know, very paternalistic towards protection of women. And for example, the vast majority of these professions were in the field of, for example, chemical industry or metallurgy or physically hard jobs. But some of and the reason behind that, of course, I would assume, was to protect the reproductive health of women as mothers or future mothers. But some of them, they were very strange and they did not fit into this logic. For example, women, they were allowed to be trolley bus drivers, but they were banned, prohibited to be bus drivers if it's a big bus for more than 15 passengers. And I can't explain this by any of these, ideas on women's health or something like that. So it was classically very, very gender stereotypical approach. But yes, so and it was a huge critique because when these initiatives on the new legislation was implemented, it was huge discussion that we push women to mining, or you know what I mean, so for hard professions, etc. So yeah, so it looks like this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So there are by now two questions in the Q&A. One is if you could put up your slides again, there's the request to see the last slide with the organization for which one could donate. And the second question is if you have a particular LGBTQ plus organization to support.
This is very good question, because basically it's very the initiative March Januar. Now I will repeat you this slide, and you will be able to contact. Basically, the one of the the leader of these initiatives. It's very famous representative of LGBT plus people organization inside NGO, inside Olena Shevchenko. And it's interesting that inside this organization for at least several years was the core organizer of feminist marches on International Day and Women's Day. So, and it's interesting because there are some, at least very prominent regional LGBT organizations in Ukraine who operate very actively during the war. For example, you can write about, or you can contact me about the details. For example, Sfera, it's an organization that operates in Kharkiv still. And as I know, the leader of this organization, Anna Shorygina, she's still in Kharkiv, which is very, very dangerous city, as you know. And in Lviv, it's a very more traditional Western region of Ukraine with a high level of religiosity. They have as well some very prominent LGBT organizations, women's LGBT organizations, right? But yes, let me show you one more time this slide, how you can support. And thank you very much that you are interested in this. So this is it. Marshjinok.com.ua. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, we will post the link also on our website later on, so people can come back and see it. Yeah.
And I know that they have very convenient system for donations from abroad as well, so you can transfer money easily, as I know.
Perfect. Okay, so while we're waiting for further questions, you spoke a lot about Ruski Mir, the Russian world. Would you say this has been an issue before the war started? That Ukraine was trying to get, oppose Russian hegemony, Russian imperialist strategies. And was it already discussed in that term that Ruski Mir is the thing that has to be opposed?
Mm-hmm.
Did that increase over the course of the war starting in 2014?
Yeah, that's very good question, and I don't think that you will be surprised that, for example, before 2014, the majority of so-called anti-gender movements in Ukraine, like everywhere, they were supported and they had strong connections with Russian organizations, with Russian Orthodox Church, who that was very powerful in Ukraine till recently. And after the Maidan revolution, the situation changed. And for example, I clearly remember that when the Maidan happened, with this more pro-European agenda, the anti-gender movements, for example, so the most famous is parental committee of Ukraine, Батьківський комітет. It was very prominent anti-gender conservative organization of Ukraine. They became definitely more silent after 2014, right? Because the political context changed. And gradually, of course, if you look at the data of surveys, 10 years ago, the vast majority of Ukraine, they supported the idea of unity with Russia and, etc. But then after Maidan, this situation changed, and now it's changed, of course, obviously dramatically. And then, the vast majority of Ukrainians, they support this idea that we need no Russia anymore, but we would prefer to join European Union. But Ruski Mir ideology, yes, it became definitely more prominent from critical point of view after the full-scale invasion, and probably maybe if even some people, they were fascinated by this idea of unity with Russia, and they have seen what does it mean in reality, right? Or I mean Russia. Mm-hmm. Probably, they changed their opinion. Of course, I assume that, for example, if the people during surveys that they say that they support more rights for LGBT people because they feel the discourse has changed, I'm not sure that they really changed their opinions, right? Because we need more time for real changes. Yeah. But anyway, they try to grasp this dominant discourse, and they feel even if they are homophobic, they feel that this discourse is not popular anymore, right? It's not mainstream. It's bad to be homophobic, including because it's associated, with barbaric Russia, so to say. Yes, so that would be my response. Yeah, thank you.
There are two more questions in the Q&A section. The first one is, do you think there's a risk of the Ukrainian population going back to more conservative views if the political support of the Western allies continues to fade and Ukraine is forced to negotiate and concede territories to Russia? Yeah.
That's a good question. And my honest response would be, I don't know. Just because, while we are dealing with the very rapid and dramatic social changes, and it's still in the process, as a sociologist, for me, it's very challenging because, like, for historians, they can explore something or they can explain something only when something is over. But sociologists and gender scholar will deal with something which is in progress, right, still. So I don't know the question. As of now, the data shows that surprisingly, we are making the progress despite the war, as you have seen, and I have more data on this. So I don't think that we have this background taking into account, for example, generational changes. Definitely youth, everywhere, is becoming more egalitarian, right? Less homophobic, etc. So I don't think, but I just don't know. I hope that it won't happen, but I just don't know.
Yeah. So the next question is kind of a question for clarification. The person asks if he understood correctly that the sexual violence has decreased since the start of the war, or if he misunderstood that.
Yeah, thank you for this important question. Well, gender-based violence increased, but I meant particularly domestic or intimate partnership violence. Because of the economic crisis, because of the stress, because some veterans, they already returned. So yes, we have the strong data. Then since the war started, the number of calls of appeals of women to different organizations is increasing. So it's becoming larger. While sexual related, the violence, which is sexual violence, which is related to conflict, of course, it's we have some data on this. It's more specific, right? But no, I did not mean that the sexual violence as such is becoming more challenging. We don't have data on this.
Okay, next question. Did I get it right that becoming part of European Union can be taken as a pressure instrument for the Ukrainian feminist movement?
Could you please, dear Sabine, could you please repeat the question one more
Yeah.
time?
The question is, did I get it right? The person asked that becoming part of European Union can be taken as a pressure instrument for the Ukrainian feminist movement. So
Uh,
meaning the feminist movement uses the European Union. Maybe Sonja, you could clarify your question because I'm still
I
I
think that I got it. I
okay,
think
okay,
I got it.
perfect.
That I got it. Yes, I think that this is kind of, even it's a mainstream discourses regarding a lot of political reforms, whatever, that as far as we would like to be the part of European Union, or it means that we have to do something to be relevant, right? To meet this criteria and requirement.
Mhm,
Yes, and it might be very good. It's a certain consensus, I would say, among many families. It's a good way, good tool, good context to make the pressure on authorities or to justify why we need more gender equality or feminism. And this is one of the reasons why not. Yes,
mhm,
but this idea is very very like popular in Ukraine. I mean that a lot of people they support this, so it could be a good tool. But I
mhm.
understand all these critiques that probably we should not idealize the European Union again. A lot of work about this, like etc. But it still works, I would say.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. I would like to come back to, I mean, of course, you don't know because we all don't know when and how the war will end. But, I mean, in history, we can see that, like, for example, in World War II, in many Western European countries, we had this effect, okay, because the men were in the battlefield, so women took their jobs. So there was on the surface kind of, progress in gender relations. And then there was like an enormous backlash in the post-war period, um, post Second World War. So, do you think that I mean, I know this is difficult to answer because as I said, we all don't know what will happen. But how sustainable will this change be in the post-war era? I mean, for example, if we look now to the US and the first executive orders of Donald Trump now, I mean, in regard to gender equality, to diversity politics, to even the definition of what is male and female, etc. I mean, politics can always change. I mean, and it does change all the time. So, and we can never predict, okay, this is the path to progress, and we will continue to walk this path. So, but maybe you have some ideas on what it would need that the change will become sustainable, maybe.
That's a very good question. Of course, I was thinking about this, like regarding the results of outcomes of the Second World War. Yes, you're right, but at the same time, it happened like almost 100 ago, and the society looked very differently. I mean, the structure of economy was different. It was highly, I don't know, industrialized, not post-industrial economy. The gender roles distribution was different in comparison. The people they did not know what is feminism or gender equality, etc. Soviet women they did not have the time, the access to contraception. The I don't know one example that in Soviet in the Ukrainian army, it was real mass total mobilization of men, total mobilization. So a lot of them, they died. But in Ukraine, we are not dealing with total mobilization. And now, as of now, the sector of defense and security, it's more than 1 million. It means that not the majority of men they serve, and a lot of men they try to avoid mobilization. Draft joggers, it's not the news for you. Like, I mean, that it's a very well known fact that, I mean that so it means that probably it will not be the core.
Mhm.
Not many men they will be heroes, because the Ukrainian society is pretty much kind of split regarding this male's conscription, responsibility and obligations, etc. And the outcome, yes, you're absolutely right. For example, we don't know what will be the outcome of the war. One situation, if the country wins, so to say, the war, then the military are heroes. But what happens if it does not happen, right? And the result, the outcome are not, for some reasons, people, they're not satisfied. I mean, that it definitely will affect the position of soldiers, right? Probably they won't be so vocal as we assume now.
Yeah.
So a lot of open questions, a lot of, and I'm still thinking about this.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there discussion to draft women as well in Ukraine?
There are some discussions, but Zelensky said that he never signed the law regarding this, the possibility of to conscript women, because it's super sensitive topic in Ukraine. There are some, by the way, women feminists who support the idea of conscription for women, or for some women, let's say, for example, I don't know, someone who don't have kids or something like that, right? So not for everybody. But as of now, no, we don't have we don't expect that it will happen, but nobody knows. Nobody knows. Again, it will depend on the situation frontline. And personally, me, I don't exclude that sooner or later, if the situation will going on in this way, I don't exclude that probably, I don't know, some groups of women, they will be conscripted, like, for example, doctors, nurses, whatever, right? But it's not the case at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, no more questions in the chat, and we are 7:45, so we kind of made it right to the point. Olena, thank you very much for your talk. This was very informative, and I think we all took a lot out of it. And thanks the audience for joining us tonight and listening to Olena Strelnyk. I hope to see all of you again next week for our second talk in online with Irina Cherepkina, who will now I have to take a look at the program. Irina will speak to us about can war be feminist? Feminist responses to the war in Ukraine. So we have a second perspective on the war in Ukraine from Irina Serepkina, same time here in Zoom next Thursday, 6 p.m. And yeah, wish you all a pleasant evening and hope to see you soon again. Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Oh, das ist jetzt schon gegangen.